Welcome back to Restless. Paul, get off your phone. Here we go.
I'm preparing. I'm ready. I'm
Excellent.
ready to go.
Sounds good.
I may or may not know the topic for
It looked
today.
as if you were nervous. That's why perhaps I
Always nervous.
called you
ready
out.
to go. Because if you're a little nervous, that means you care.
We do care.
This is true.
We do
And
care.
we do care.
Yeah, absolutely. We
Yeah.
we know that our listeners, especially the ones, we recently got 115 downloads from China.
Wow.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if
we're
it was
allowed?
like I wasn't sure if it was the Chinese Communist Party spying on us or
They haven't gone on to
a
us
devout
yet.
Catholic. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But props to our Chinese friends, whether you're in this for the right reasons or not. But anyway, you've joined myself, Lauren. Excuse me, not
Lauren.
Lauren.
That's happened more
This
than
has
once.
happened multiple times.
Myself. It just kind of flows off the tongue. Myself. Lauren.
Who am I?
Myself, Diane and Joe. I mean, Diane and Paul.
I'm not Joe.
Definitely not Joe. No.
Well, yeah.
Anyway.
We both have strong opinions in our Italian, but
Yes, but that's where the similarity ends.
pretty much.
And your Catholic faith.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, so welcome to Restless. Today we're talking about stress and anxiety, which seems to be the scourge of the modern world. So in your daily life, because you both have pretty high octane jobs, and there's a lot of people kind of riding on what you do. So do you feel stressed a lot? And it's just like stress in just general. I mean, even outside of your job, do you feel stressed most of the time, some of the time, all the time?
I would say that I've had a nice blessing that my stress levels have come down over time. So when I was a junior professional like you mentioned work, so we'll cover work first. But I think when I was a junior professional, I was very stressed. Like I wouldn't say I had a panic attack, but I had a tangential panic attack when I was at my first job.
Freak out moment.
Yeah, I was just completely overwhelmed, and it was just too much. I was working in New York City and also like planning to move to Connecticut and changing jobs and having to find a new place to live and buy a car because I was moving to Connecticut. And now, looking back on it, it's like all those things would be the easiest things of my day today.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of it. I think that it's been, I don't know, as
Well,
I've grown more, I've matured. It's just,
Sure.
I've been able to handle more
We
over
grow in
time.
responsibility.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As
And
we
so
age.
the things that stress me out now more are kind of bigger picture items, not a lot of kind of the day to day.
More like, direction our country's heading, kind of bigger picture.
It could
or
be
just
that.
like-
I try to. It's more things that probably are a little bit under my control. Just kind of like where my life is going and what I'm doing, and am I being a faithful Catholic and things like that. Those
Yeah.
are the things that probably cause me more
Really.
anxiety. But I think I've
It
mellowed
really
out.
does your faith cause you anxiety?
No, but if I were, well, I mean, if I don't feel that it's like a therapy session. If I don't feel that, if I don't feel as though I'm,
Tell me about your childhood.
if I feel as though that I'm failing in some way in my Catholic faith, which I think that's why we have confession and it's why we have the Catholic life.
Yeah.
That puts a little stress. Puts a little, I wouldn't say anxiety, but definitely like it's a stress and I don't like being late, and so that will stress me out. Those are like acute stressors.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my acute stressors have mitigated over time.
Yeah.
I've definitely, I'm like the same person. I'm the same, but like the edges have been softened out a little bit, which is good generally because I probably wasn't the most pleasant person.
Interesting. You've got me so much thinking now about stress with the faith. I don't know. Do you feel like a stress or an anxiety with the faith, like trying to live up to a certain standard or worrying about your salvation or?
I mean, I guess I don't worry. I try not to worry about it too much because I do what I can, and I do make an effort every day to carve out that time for prayer and for mass and for rosary and all that stuff. I think it's hard to be a judge of your own salvation, but what I've been told and, from people who I trust, the Dominicans and Franciscans, is really just like, are you like to look at your life in terms of like the way that you think about situations and like, are you forming virtue? Are you approaching like, do you see kind of like the fruits of the Spirit working in your life? And so I definitely have seen how God has transformed me from like the time that I was a child to a teenager to 20 years old to 30, and I see growth. Is it perfect? No. But I also like, it's easy to fall into a despair, sort of mentality and to, distrust that, like God is not merciful and that he's not working with me. And so, yeah, I think there's a balance, but I try to like anytime that I am kind of more worried about that, it's like, I just go to confession. I go to adoration on a regular basis. So that kind of, mellows me out.
God keeps bringing up to my life Teresa of Avila's Interior Castle.
Mm-hmm.
Not, I don't have the book, so I have never read it, but I've read, there's just been different like articles that have come up within the last like 3 weeks in my life where this is just kind of like in the forefront, like Interior Castle. And I've always been kind of more like reading John of the Cross when it comes to like, tracking your spiritual development. Cause he talks about the 3 stages of purgative way, illuminative way, and unitive way. Right. But she actually breaks that down further into 7 stages, the 7 mansions. And I think it's actually a little more helpful because you can kind of see that even within the purgative way, there's like a big distinction between the first mansion and the third mansion, and so I don't know. I think God's bringing that to my attention to make me realize, wow, I'm not nearly as far as I should be, and not nearly as far as I thought I was in holiness. So it's been kind of a kick in the pants, and I realized like maybe I haven't been not stressed, but anxious enough. I don't know if that's the right way.
Yeah.
Not concerned enough about my own growth in holiness, because my life is, I'm 40. My life's half over, more than likely. Who knows? I mean, but could be.
Yeah.
So like I'm on the second half. So am I where I should be? Where am I heading into where I should be?
Right. And sometimes even like what stress has revealed to me about myself is that, like the ways that I'm lacking or weaknesses. So for example, just, it's getting super stressed out about a work situation or whatever from an eternal perspective of like, okay, I have maybe 40, 50 years, whatever left. Is this, is this something that I should be stressing about? And is there something like that has to do more with like the spiritual life and growth there that I should actually be caring about? And like the fact that I am stressing maybe means that like I'm not trusting God fully, or I'm still like attached to my plans and to my, like desire for control of these situations, even if it's coming from a good place of wanting to kind of like be organized and on top of stuff of like, am I really surrendered to God? Because that is ultimately like the original sin of, like distrusting God's goodness. So I think the lack of surrender, because it's very easy to say, I trust God and to say that on an intellectual level, but to be able to live it is something that, I think takes a lifetime, but it's like when I look at my spiritual life of where I can grow, it's that surrender. Because I think if we were fully surrendered, we would have peace. We would just bring it to God and have peace.
And that's kind of one of the things that's brought up for me this episode was the question of like, as a Christian, I know I shouldn't be stressed, right? I know stress should not be a part of a Christian's life if we're truly trusting God. But when you're in that moment and you're feeling stress, even all that intellectual, like, yeah, I should be surrendering and trusting God, like there's more of a gut reaction for me that all the intellectual telling myself that trust, surrender, all that, it just doesn't take away the gut reaction of like, oh, I got to get this done. I'm so stressed. I don't know what to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think we are still made human, like we have this, stress is a reaction too, right? Where we have like endorphins flowing in our bodies and like, and that's a gift from us, right? It's a gift to us from God, because that's what allows us to like fight or flight response, protect ourselves, protect our families, or fight if we have to, defend ourselves, like all these things. That's triggering your body.
And I know before original sin, our bodily reactions to things were always in accord with right reason. Right. And now they're not.
Right.
So now a lot of times we have physical reactions, whatever.
Well, you could also argue it's like, well, there wasn't. We also wouldn't have evil. Right.
So
no,
to be stressed or
but
fearful
serious.
about.
Like, so we have like, okay, so that we have this gift that we can defend. Let's say defend ourselves against evil, but that is it's part of our human psyche. So you're like, because we're not actually being attacked by like leopards, right?
Not currently.
No, and hopefully not. But not in
there's parts of the world where you are still attacked.
Not in Norwalk.
Not in Norwalk, Connecticut. No.
But
there's just bad drivers and
right. There's other things.
Yeah, other things.
Well, it's a good example. Driving is a good example. Like the moment where you like you see something coming at you, tense up, and you react immediately, and your heart rate goes up, and your body releases like adrenaline and cortisol. Like
oh yeah,
like it.
You drive on the Merritt Parkway and someone slams on their brakes in front of you, and all of a sudden, I don't know if you feel this feeling, but I get this weird tingling all over my body.
Yeah,
like,
it's your body
and
literally reacting.
Like,
it's
whoa,
your body literally using like excreting all types of chemicals to
wake you up,
so that you react and protect yourself so you don't die. Right. And so that's part of our human life. But because we're human and we have all these other like we have other things. So like we're not every day being like, hopefully, well, I don't know if you're a crazy driver, but we're not every day kind of in this position where we have to like literally fight off and protect ourselves. Hopefully, like not every minute of every day. But when we start feeling that threat to us, our bodies are reacting in a very similar way.
Yeah.
Right. And it's actually irrational to some extent. Right.
It is and it isn't, because
it can be and it can't be. I think we could overreact to things that we ought not to.
I was kind of debating within myself, like, what's a good definition of stress? Like, why do we feel it? And what I came up with was that stress is a reaction to a demand that we don't know that we can meet.
Mm.
When something's demanding to us and we think it's too large. So even, like, for example, I don't know, as you mentioned, like, buying a car at the time was something you'd never done before, right?
Mm.
So this was a hurdle that you had no idea where to even start, probably.
Right.
Because I know when I first bought a car, I didn't know what to do. Like,
right.
Do you look online? Do you contact a friend? Do you contact a dealer?
Mm.
How much should I pay? How much should, and what are the questions to ask? You don't even know, right? And so anything in life, whether it's a challenge at work or a driver on the road, the question, is it a challenge that you feel inequipped to overcome?
Right. Yeah. And so I think there's an element of, so I guess my point is that there's an element of kind of like there's a biological aspect of it, but then I think as we grow and mature and hopefully order ourselves toward God, I hope the hope is that your stresses, there's like the fight or flight stuff, which like you probably should have and will continue to have, but then the little things, hopefully they start to give way to larger things.
So can you by faith start to lessen that visceral physical stress response?
I mean,
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too.
Through prayer, I would say.
Yeah, and stress, I mean, at the end of the day, like, nowhere in the scripture does, like, God promise that, like, your life is going to be, like, just full of peace and happiness every moment of every day. So I think, especially this generation, our generation and younger, a lot of people are expecting that their lives are just going to be on earth, just easy, just no stress, no anxiety, and a lot of times, like, stress can be a sign that you're maybe taking on too much or doing something, like you need to kind of just work on reactions and big picture, like eternal perspective. Does this matter for eternity? But it can also be good in the sense of, like, we need to learn to pick up our crosses and to see our everyday life and the stresses of everyday life as potential moments for sanctification, of, like, offering whatever are, like, the difficulty of the task for particular intentions and all of that. I think just there's a lot of value that comes from being under stress and having to persevere, like the virtues that you need in order to overcome that, but also, like, to realize your dependence on God. A lot of times when things are going great, you're not necessarily acknowledging.
So you're saying that stress can be good, and
I think it can be good. I think it's very important for sanctification. Like, people, there's no resurrection except through the cross. So we have to pick up our crosses, and crosses often are not pleasant. They involve stress. They involve anxiety.
Crosses always are not pleasant.
But they involve what you were talking about. They involve the unknown, of, like, venturing into the unknown. But, like, they can be, like, if we see them as God, as tailor-made for us, as given to us for our sanctification, for working on the, whatever it is that we have to work on, I mean, they can be used for good. And so stress, I think, can be a good thing.
Yeah. But here's where my soul kind of yearns for something more, is that I think a lot of stress can be avoided if we have a good mentor who's willing to walk us through the thing that we find overwhelming and teach us how to do it.
Yeah.
Right? So if your dad had sat down with you the first time you bought a car and said, all right, son, this is what we're going to do, and maybe even gone with you. Because when I first bought a car, it was an older priest who said, he was looking at the time I was driving this Mercury Tracer.
Wow.
It was great. It had automatic seatbelts. So you just closed the door.
Yeah.
It was so cool. It was really neat. But it was dying, and it had 200,000 miles or whatever. And so he's like, you need a new car. And I was like, I agree, but I have no idea how to do it. He's like, let's go together. And so he and I went to the dealership, and we got this great used car. This was my old Ford Focus that we got. And it was so nice. I mean, I felt like I was not alone facing it. And that's one of the things I find very stressful, even being a pastor, especially being a pastor, in that there's a lot of stuff that comes at me every day that I don't even know how to deal with. And one might say, oh, well, the diocese can help you, but if you ever tried to call the diocese for anything, you realize that they're not always the best, the best, or most responsive.
Yeah.
It's just the feeling all alone.
I agree. I mean, I've experienced that particularly at work. When you're assigned a new project, and if you feel like you can work with other people and that you have a team that's kind of helping you, or someone that you can go to, a mentor, or just anyone that you can really ask a question. Paul, I'm sure you've experienced this too. But when you feel alone, it's like the stress can be overwhelming, right? Because you just don't know what direction to do. You don't want to make a mistake. If you're a perfectionist like myself, it's made even worse because you just want to do the best that you possibly can and give 100% of yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, like feeling alone is certainly a trigger.
And then I really go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say with work, I think that I used to get very stressed out. On that, I used to be very stressed out if I had like 18,000 deliverables due in 3 days.
Yeah.
Right.
Understandably.
Right. It was stressful. Especially when I didn't have control. So I'm gonna get to a point in a second, but especially when I didn't have control over certain inputs that I needed for those deliverables.
Right.
So I'm just waiting, and I think over time, this took many years, probably like this is only maybe 4 years since I've actually adopted this mentality. I have a new mentality where if it's out of my control, I just let it go. Right. And it's almost like I have to, I can't control it. Like I'm holding on to something I can't control. It's an undue stress.
Yeah.
I can't do anything about it. So I think that I would say that there are things that, we ought to, I don't want to use the word, but like ought to stress about, like you were saying, like things that are good, right? That you should, it's like, okay, well, I'm venturing into the unknown. That causes stress. But, through faith, you kind of go, right? You pick up your cross and you go, right? But also, but you ought not to stress about the things, and it's hard to, that you can't control. Like if I'm waiting on an input from some external party that I need data from, let's say, like I shouldn't stress about that. I could do everything in my power to like call them and see what's going on, and then then I can't do anything else. There's nothing else I can do. And so why would I stress about that?
Yeah.
It's out of my control. So
and that is true. It's just that realization.
And some of that, from your example, is out of your control. You're doing the best that you can, but you're not going to know the answers to everything. So you can't, like you're putting stress on yourself that you probably shouldn't because of the fact that, there's just nothing, in that situation you're doing, reaching out to people and.
But now how do you both, and because I face this too, how do you reconcile the fact that that your boss is going to be unhappy, even though it's out of your control?
I don't know. I've learned to accept that happens sometimes.
Yeah, I think you
it's
have
like
to.
It happens. And my boss is like, I've always had good bosses. So if there's like, here's what happened, this is what I did, this is what didn't happen because of these things. It's always like, well, that's a logical way, and that's why it didn't get done.
Yeah.
Right.
You can't beat yourself up for something, like you said, that is out of your control. That you've done, if you know that you've done everything in your power to think about the situation, to, resolve whatever you can, that you have to be content with yourself and your efforts. And I've had great bosses too, of just, they know, especially if you've built up your reputation, right? So that's why it's so important to just give 100% of yourself to whatever your career vocation is, because then you can't have regrets if you've given
right, and vocation too, giving it to your spouse, giving it to your kids.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a workplace. It could be just vocationally or just the relationship with people as well. You can't control every outcome.
Yeah.
I think that's another point. I think we've been talking a lot about work, but I think that actually what does stress me out more and more, maybe because like work has become like I'm good at it, so. And I know what things to stress about, what not. But I think like interpersonal relationships for me are still, maybe because I'm naturally an introvert, but are still like, they do provide some anxiety. Like, did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing? Did I do enough? Was I generous enough? Was I charitable enough? Like those are the things that I also think about. And like, I don't know. Because sometimes like, I don't know. And you don't find out, and you may never find out.
That's the unnerving part, right?
Yeah. Like work, there's a deliverable and it's done. Yeah. But with interpersonal relationships, like you never really.
Tell me about it. Know. Certainly as a priest, I can tell you that the not knowing, I give a homily. Did I say the right thing? Was that truly spirit led, or was that all for me? And people walk out the door and nice homily, Father. Well, did it change a life, or did someone leave the church because of it? You never know. So that's something that stresses me out too. Yeah. The unknowing of the interpersonal relationships.
Yeah. And so like at work, so how that plays out in work, let's say, because we've been talking a lot about work, is that I'm more concerned now about, because I'm in a position of more of a managerial position, right? I've been doing this 10 years and plus, and, I'm in a managerial position. And so I'm always concerned about, like, how am I, like, encouraging, growing my junior staff? Am I putting too much pressure on them? Am I giving them too much work? Like, we work hard, and our junior staff works, like,
Harder,
more,
right?
more, like, it's funny, like, you probably experienced this, like, the junior staff works more hours, but they have lower responsibility. I have lower amount of tasks, but way higher responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's a different type of stress.
Different stress.
Yeah, it's different stress. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll never forget my first, my kind of going off that, my first exam in college. We were so stressed, freshman year, fall semester, final exam. And the guy who's sitting next to me taking the philosophy test turns to me and says, "You remember how stressed we were freshman year of high school?" And we thought that was like the biggest stress in the world. And now it's like nothing. And we would go back to it and be like, that was a piece of cake. But, someday we'll be like writing our doctoral dissertations and think this is nothing too.
Yeah.
I kind of kept it in perspective. I thought that.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. Oh, but a lot of the stressors too, I think what helps me to come out of my stress, work stress, whatever, is just bringing it back to that eternal perspective. Like, on my deathbed, this is not going to matter, and all that matters is, like, charity, like true charity, growth in charity.
Sure.
And I think that's why, I relate to what Paul was saying in terms of the spiritual growth, because sometimes I'm like, wait, am I just thinking too much from a worldly perspective here and not focusing enough on the spiritual stuff, like the stuff that's actually going to matter, and honestly, like, how I'm coming across to other people, the way that I'm treating other people. I think, it's just something that I've been more cognizant of. I think maybe because of growth in the spiritual life too, of wanting to do those things better.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly it's like at work in a high stress, demanding job, it's very easy to treat everything and everyone sort of as a means to an end. And like, we're spending so much time at work, we really have to see, like, how is God calling me to glorify him today? How is he calling me to evangelize in this workplace? How is he calling me to, like, be there for my coworker and truly listen and care?
I mean, one could say that you're working not to get the product done.
Yeah.
You're working really to develop your talents, to glorify God, and to bring
and
Christ into that
and
place.
to develop relationships with people so that you can, potentially talk about faith and, like, share some things that are very important. And I don't know, I see that as particularly my work as now being kind of like a bigger goal.
Yeah.
And just, performing well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the things that, I don't know, this is maybe shifting topics a little bit, but as we're talking, one of the things that kind of strikes me, because I see a lot of high school teens that are super stressed about everything in the world, and there's a lot of pressures put on them. Probably way too much, from sports to academics to
social media.
You got the pressure to look perfect and everything. But I think one of the reasons why perhaps a lot of young adults struggle with stress is because parents are not parenting properly to give their kids the tools necessary to deal with them. And I think if I was to give some advice to a parent to help your kid be less stressed, challenge your kid to do difficult things, but be with them when they do it. So you can guide them through it, so they're not just floundering on their own. Whatever the difficult thing is, whether it's taking a camping trip and having to set up a tent in the pouring rain, or take up a new hobby, whatever. But it's not a matter of, like, doing it for its own sake. But I think a lot of young adults get to young adulthood and they've never had, like, a storehouse of things that were really difficult that they were able to overcome.
Yeah. I think there's a saying that the most difficult thing you do in a day is the most difficult thing you've done in the day. Right.
I've never heard that saying. I don't know what it means.
Right. So if the most difficult thing you did in the day is get out of bed, right? If you're there's people that suffer from extreme anxiety and depression such that they can't even get out of bed.
Yeah, sure.
Like that,
sure.
just in and of that is an anxiety provoking exercise, because it means they have to face the day.
Yeah.
Right. That might be somebody's hardest thing that they do in the day. It might be that, doing something, going to work, doing all the things, talking to their spouse, that might be very hard. Right. But we built, like you said, it's good to continuously add in those things in your day. So, like, people might take, are you still doing cold showers?
Yeah.
Like, but that was probably, like, a really hard, when you started doing that. I don't.
Now you've made me lose
lazy.
all of my virtue, but go.
What?
To admit it to our listening audience.
Well, my fault. Sorry. But I think, but when you first started, my point is, when you first started doing it, that was probably a very hard part of your day.
Yeah.
right? But now it's probably you probably have way harder parts of your day than that 2 minutes or whatever.
Oh yeah, definitely way harder.
Right,
Absolutely
right,
way harder. Yeah,
right.
without a
Because
doubt.
now the hardest thing of your day is no longer that. That's now probably relatively easy.
That's an interesting insight.
right. And so the hardest
Yeah.
thing you've done is the hardest thing you've done, and so
I
there's a lot of wisdom in that.
There is, and it reminds me of Saint Josemaria Escrivá, who wrote about. He said, the first moment of your day is, he called it the heroic moment, because you're faced with a choice. Do you hit the snooze button or do you get out of bed? And he says, if you can get out of bed without hitting the snooze button, you've done something heroic that day. And what a great way to start off your day,
Right.
with conquering yourself in a really small way.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'll be honest, I have taken cold showers for 4 years, and it's not easier. There are bigger challenges, absolutely,
Right.
but it's not like I'm like, oh, this is pleasant now. No, it's not. But that's the thing, right? Getting out of bed in the morning might be a very difficult thing, and it still might be a difficult thing 10 years down the line. But at least you've done it, and you've
and it
conquered
allows
that.
you it allows you now, because now you've gotten out of bed. Now you can do the next hard thing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And it just keeps going from there.
So don't be afraid of the hard things.
Yeah, it's picking up. It's the same thing. It's picking up our cross and marching up Calvary.
But
right?
that's where growth comes. That's where sanctification comes. That's where, like you said, if you never, life is full of sorrow and suffering. So if you're trying to avoid it, it's coming for you. Like, it's coming for you at a certain point. So you may as well face it head on. And like Paul said, I mean, the way that he approaches situations at work now versus 10 years ago is different, because he's had all of those experiences. But if he didn't have those experiences, he'd probably be potentially with the same reaction that he had 10 years ago, because you have to go through the storm in order to understand, like, to get that perspective and to see, like, just for that growth to happen.
Yeah.
So that brings me to the next question, right? Is that I've often heard the saying, busy stands for being under Satan's yoke. I don't know if you ever heard that. It's like the little acronym there.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
But
So people often say, if you're too busy, that's clearly a sign that it's not from God, right? But at the same time, like, I wonder if one could say, if you're too stressed, that's also not from God, because you seem to say that, like, stress, God can bring great good out of stress, which brings great good out of everything. But how do you know what stress to take on and what stress to not take on, right? Because if perhaps somebody comes to you and is like, hey, can you join this ministry? Hey, can you volunteer with this? And you're like, that's going to be kind of stressful, right? Because now I got to fit one more thing into my schedule, and I don't know if I can do it. It's going to really stretch me, and it's kind of outside my comfort zone. Does God want us to take on stress?
I think it's like, there's the virtue of prudence, right? So we have to, like, kind of discern what God is really calling us to do. And yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly ways to overwhelm yourself by saying yes to everything. But if you say no to everything, I mean, also, you say busy is being under Satan's yoke, but being idle is also
Devil's playground.
Devil's playground, right?
Devil's playground.
Happy
Yeah.
medium,
So,
somewhere in between.
yeah, so-
No, there's truth to that, though. It's like when you build rockets, right? Like Elon Musk builds rockets, right? And he shoots them up in the air. It's like incredible. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to build the rocket that's going to go to Mars. So he shoots them up in the air and they explode. And he shoots another one up in the air and it explodes. And another one goes up and it explodes. But every time, they're testing different tolerances. They're figuring out how not to make the rocket explode by shooting them up in the air.
It's a very expensive way to do it.
Well, there's no other way to do it.
He's got
It's
a
like,
lot of money, so.
you want to be a rocket scientist? This is what you do.
What about just borrow the plans from NASA? They did it successfully.
Well, no, they didn't.
Well, okay.
Well, I mean, Elon
It's been
just
a
had to
couple
go
times, but-
rescue the guys
Oh,
at the space station because NASA messed up with Boeing.
That's fair. That's fair.
Okay, but that's a different story. So, but my point is that, like, you should. There's another analogy. This one's worse, but it's funnier.
How could it get worse than that one?
I'm actually following these. I like them.
Okay,
All right, go
so
on.
so it's the same thing with, like, it's the same thing when you make good wine. Okay, so good wine, you should make wine as cheap as it should be, right? As cheap as you could possibly make a good wine, but no cheaper, right? You push the tolerances
Yep.
and see where they break, right? And so when we talk about, and that's how you develop prudence. So when you're talking about spiritual, like, so for example, like, if you're going to take on, it's like every day I'm going to pray, as like just me, like right now, is like can barely pray rosary every day, but I'm going to do liturgy hours, all 5, and I'm going to pray a rosary and a Divine Mercy Chaplet at 3 while managing my job. Like, I will fail, right? It's just, I'm going to just burst, and then maybe I even get discouraged. But maybe if I start with the rosary and then add in evening prayer or something like that, you push that, and then you do like one other thing, but then you get discouraged. It's like, okay, well, I can handle these 2 things, and then you push one thing. You build the tolerances. You push the tolerances a little bit and see if they're good, and then you build on them. and you can use that with the spiritual life. You can do it in lots of different things. So,
And you
so
do
you do
have
what
to
you
push
can,
yourself.
and you do what you can and no more.
Hmm.
You do what you can and no more until you could do more.
I'm honestly, I believe very heavily that people need to, you need to push yourself in order to grow, in order to like have more confidence in your abilities, to get outside of your comfort zone. If you're comfortable, you're doing something wrong. I know for tennis, Billie Jean King, there's a sign at the U.S. Open before the players walk out. Pressure is a privilege, and it is. I think that there's like this generation is just, we're a bunch of softies, and everything is
Snowflake.
just.
Let's like archetypically, like Moana's great. The Disney movie, you know, Moana.
Never seen it. No,
Okay, quick premise: island girl lives on island. Island is falling apart and needs to be saved. Girl gets on raft and goes out into the ocean, and you're never ever supposed to go out into the ocean. That's the premise of the movie. Okay, plus or minus. But Moana, being like this strong person, like goes out into the ocean, like leaves her island, right? Like pushes herself, goes over the hill. Like there's a hill right there, and you have to go over the hill.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same thing to save her island. So it's like your life is crumbling apart, but you have to go explore the open ocean. You have to leave in order to fix your crumbling life, because otherwise, if you just stay where you are, you'll crumble.
Well, that's true. I mean, our lives change when our habits change, says Matthew Kelly.
Yeah.
And that's certainly true. And so, yeah, getting out of your comfort zone, I think it's one of those both ands, right? Because at the same time, I do think that you have to discern your charism, right? And if you try to do something, if you're invited to do something, or maybe forced to do something that's not your charism, you might do it decently, adequately, but not really well.
Yeah.
Right. You have to know. I mean, I've worked with youth ministry a lot for a very long time, and there'd be many people that invite, hey, you're a young person, be on core team, and they come on core team, and it's awkward, and they can't do it, and it's not, and they just don't have the gifts and talents. So it may have stretched them perhaps, but it didn't lead to fruit.
But that's like prudence too, because I mean, you asked me to do middle school youth group for a year, and I hated it.
Yeah.
But
it is true.
For
it is
the
true.
record.
She hated it.
Yeah.
She hated
and
it. Yeah.
but I teach RCIA now, and I love it. Like I
So you
love
work with
teaching.
that
I
age
love
group
teaching
and-
the adults, young adults. It's so yeah. It's totally. It's like I could take on something like that, but my charism is not there.
Yeah. But I mean, I do give you credit for trying. And that may have stretched you.
And that's what Paul was saying too. Of like you kind of have to you have to test the waters a bit, because if you don't ever try, then you'll never know.
Yeah.
If I had said no to RCIA because I'm too busy or too stressed, which is probably true, but
We'd miss out on blessings.
But it's such a joy. There's joy in the stress, because you know that this is like something that is like God is calling you to, or in your work that you can be offering it for intentions and all that stuff. So there can be a joy in the stress.
Amen. That's certainly true. Yeah. So I guess to wrap up, because our time is up, but so stress is not always a bad thing. Stress can help us to grow. Stress is often, finding a challenge that's too great for us to accomplish, but nothing's too great for God to accomplish. And we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. It might mean we have to find different ways to overcome the stress, certainly through prayer, through finding a mentor to guide us, through learning different skill sets that perhaps we never had before. Sacraments, and keeping that eternal perspective, realizing some of the stuff we stress over really isn't going to matter in 50 years or eternity. But don't be stressed. Do your best, as a first grader once told me.
That's great.
So,
excellent.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of Restless. Not stressless, but restless. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM, 103.9 FM, and wherever you get your podcasts. So tune in next time for more bad jokes.